This BRICS Africa channel and conversation with Mr. Luthando Vuba, the head of international trade at Standard Bank. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you.
Okay. Can you share some insights into South Africa's current international trade landscape and its significance for BRICS and Africa as a whole?
Certainly. I think we live in an interesting time where we are seeing South Africa have some shifts in the structural reforms, following some challenges in our energy supply. We've also seen challenges in our transport and logistics infrastructure, our ports and rail. And there are those reforms that are being carried out that are, forming that turnaround strategy, but also starting to look at the future growth of the country. And I think those are structural, elements that are very key when we talk anything, South Africa's trade. There's been the tariff shifts with US policy shifts since the new administration that we also have to observe. However, with all these headwinds in geopolitics and also infrastructure, we still have this very opportune market, which is the African market. And I think South Africa is perfectly poised to be really an instrumental player in furthering and growing that intra-Africa trade. Intra-Africa trade currently sits at 14-15%, of Africa's total trade. That's arguably very low if you compare it to the likes of the European bloc. Obviously, they have 30 years of having the EU bloc. Yes. But I think aspirationally and the maturity in some sectors that South African economy has really puts it in a very key position to be a dominant player that grows this intra-Africa trade. So I think we have headwinds. There's some, some structural challenges. Some are still, work in progress. I think we really need to rapidly move around, playing a more key role also in the energy sector, not just in the country, but in the region. Yes. Zambia's had some challenges. Zimbabwe continues to have some challenges. And we know that, the Chinese are also investing in some of these spaces. And I think South Africa, both in its private sector landscape, but also just in terms of our development finance institutions, can play a key role and a strategic role in that. So I just want to elevate that whilst all these headwinds are happening, there's very key pockets of opportunities that we should be considering in the region and the rest of the continent.
Beyond the continent, what are the specifics or the specific role of BRICS that you foresee in the upcoming future?
I think with BRICS, it's important that it drives very specific but strategic, bilateral initiatives. You have, the core BRICS countries that are now expanded. And I think what is very resonant for emerging markets and developing economies is how we increase and there's better flow of finance into key infrastructure projects. Any economy to develop and grow needs critical infrastructure. It needs strategic infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is to ensure that there is water provision, there's energy provision, and there's roads to actually move the goods. Strategic infrastructure is ports, where you locate your ports. It is, do you do inland ports if you're a landlocked country? What are those strategic investments that then attract more foreign direct investment? So I think a balance of that being a very clear mandate of BRICS countries would be one that shifts the dial. If you think about some key projects that could be done in, say, an African country that has bears promise, if you then have whether it's through a policy, that is ratified by BRICS countries, or it's through a special purpose vehicle, that's a fund that can mobilize that, it can certainly, accelerate some of the projects that could be done in the space of infrastructure, owing to those, whether it's strategic or critical infrastructure. And I think that's for me one of the things that just always comes to mind when I think of the BRICS countries. The other one is you could look at trade policy. We've had beneficial policies, with different bilaterals. If you look at AGOA, what it's meant for African countries, China recently announced that it's moving 53 African countries to tariff-free. Why can that not be what BRICS puts in place? Whether it puts in place for BRICS countries or it puts it in place for African countries that are trading with BRICS countries, etc. And I think that's another one that could be a strategic initiative that really shifts things and its relevance, but also the impact that BRICS could have. And then when it comes to then financial markets related to financing financing of infrastructure and the flow of that capital. Now, what do we look at those reforms of the BRICS countries that could make it easier for investment between two countries? So I think those three anchors is really what I see as opportune in how the BRICS can play a role in Africa's development.
How has your role as the executive head of international trade at Business and Commercial Banking evolved in response to recent global economic changes?
That's a very good question. Sleepless nights. There's no guessing what the man at the White House is going to do next or announce next. But I think what we have seen, one, is the resilience of African businesses that have looked at it with a keen eye. Some have looked at it with the eye of, let's see and let's wait and see. And some have looked at it to be like, this is a perfect opportunity to actually double down on diversifying supply chains, and on that, intentionally looking at the region. So I've done a range of consultations of our clients that are looking for opportunities in the rest of African markets, that are looking to expand to other African markets, even if it means that they are not exporting, they're not getting their goods exported at the margins that they're enjoying from the European countries or the US. It's just a very intentional shift to say we'll look at intra-Africa trade as their long-term strategy. That's been one. The other one is we've seen the tariffs and policy changes announced, and then there's a revert. So the other thing that it's done is, though it shocked the system, is built that uncertainty. And it's uncertain that it can revert. And I think what has been of interest for me to observe is the agility of businesses, but at the same time, some of them are actually just continuing, and they're looking at it and saying, well, it's impacting actually the US consumer if the tariffs increased, so they're willing to continue and just, pass on that cost to consumer. We're also seeing continued, investment and business being done by US businesses, on the continent. So that's been interesting to see that hasn't affected that, So I think whilst the geopolitical tides are affecting some, it's interesting how business is looking at the growth areas in the different countries. So for instance, the tensions between the US and China has presented opportunities for alternative value chains to supply into the US. So your big retailers have been looking at Africa for supply of some products. The cashew nuts that they would get from, coming from India that's actually grown in West Africa, how do they actually invest in processing in West Africa that they actually source it directly from there? And that's been part of a program that actually was running for the past 2 years, where they're looking at that. So we are seeing those continue, and the current shifts in policy or tariffs hasn't really impacted that. So I think there's sort of pockets of activity that's still continuing despite what's been shifts. But for me, it has just been seeing this evolution of very, very increased and intentional focus on the continent. Where are the opportunities, which markets present opportunities, whether it is in the agri sector, manufacturing, auto sector, energy, and really seeing those businesses being willing to take their bet and start to look at these alternative markets in the region compared to international regions. Because it's not just the US that shifts. Even European Union has introduced additional regulatory measures, which is going to make it onerous on exporters that are exporting into the EU, what they have to have in place. So I think all of these shifts, whilst China's opening up tariff-free for African markets, I think that's what we're experiencing, is that. And the evolution to your question has been exactly that, as being adaptive. Fortunately, we have our expertise in China. We have presence in the likes of your UK, and also now we have a New York office. So leveraging our our expertise, but also our presence in those markets, and how we can guide and support these businesses as they look to a different way of growing their businesses.
What are the key challenges and opportunities facing African businesses seeking to expand their international trade partnership?
Sorry, come again?
What are the key challenges and opportunities facing African businesses seeking to expand their international trade partnerships. Part of it you've mentioned
Yes.
in the previous segment,
Yeah.
but I'd like to hear from this particular perspective.
I'll start with the challenges and I'll pick up the opportunities. So the
Yes.
challenges are oftentimes it's the access to information, and we've done a bit of work around that. Publishing Africa's first trade barometer in 2022, and we continue to publish that each year. So access to information is a key one, but access to information about alternative markets as well. Understanding from a policy to regulation what you require, and importantly, the ability to connect into the market, the opportunity. So you may know that China, is in huge demand of citrus, especially citrus from South Africa and Zimbabwe. But like, how do you connect into the value chain? But then what's required for you to have in place and registered, not just in your country, but also with China. So I think it's access to information, understanding the regulatory environment. That is not always available or accessible to businesses. And I think that's a big challenge. It's a big prohibitor why you're not seeing more businesses actually explore these new markets. The other challenge is perhaps on just the risk perception that we have of African countries. Oftentimes, not that your product is not good enough, but it's the perception of, will the goods come? Will it be the right quality? But at the same time, even in the region, if I export my products to Nigeria, will I get my payment? And I think that perceived risk oftentimes also an inhibitor. And then when it comes to opportunities, one, you have this continent by 2040 being home to 1 in every 4 youngest population in the world. 1 in every 4 will be here. We will have the biggest uplift, of people out of poverty, but also the biggest uplift of a population into middle income, right? And then with those projections and having this continent going from in 2025 to 2030, around $3 trillion of consuming consumer packaged goods. If you're a business and you manufacture consumer packaged goods, that has to be something that catches your eye or your attention. So I think when we talk about opportunities, you have the continent, but also when you look outside the region, Africa continues to have about 40 to 50% arable land that hasn't been untouched. So when it comes to our ability to actually produce more, to export more, to both supply the continent but also export to the world, it still remains a big opportunity that we have. And then you have this 1.3 billion market, which is China, which is aggressively looking at the continent to source more agricultural produce and products. And I think that's another big opportunity that shouldn't be missed by African businesses.
How can BRICS nations collaborate to enhance trade and economic development across Africa?
I think the earlier response around policy, I think looking at policy that speaks to trade. It could be trade beneficial policy that speaks to investment in specific sectors or in certain industrialization value chains. I think that will be key. In the BRICS, you have a Russia, you have a China. You have a China that really is the manufacturing hub of the world. You have a South Africa, which is, does quite well as an African country when it comes to manufacturing, but has a potential to do more. That's a strategic initiative that you could look at, where there's a clear program of how we beef up production of, let's say, energy products or manufacturing capacity of, products that are inputs into, our mining sectors, because that's one of our key sectors that, is across the continent, or it could be in agriculture, agro-processing. And I think that's for me where it could be very strategic as to how we lever BRICS, or it could be BRICS as a community, how they target specific, hubs on the continent, for investment. And I think those are just some of the thoughts that could actually be things that move the dial. But the important thing is BRICS would, the BRICS countries with its economic power, how do they mobilize capital to flow into key projects that could actually see the industrialization of the emerging markets and developing economies, whether it's BRICS countries or it's South Africa or it is African countries.
What initiatives or strategies is your bank implementing to support African businesses in accessing international markets?
So we support our clients when it comes to understanding their growth plans. Most importantly, in addition to financing them, it's important to understand their growth plans. We also then support them on an advisory perspective, as like I mentioned earlier, on access to information, but also importantly, access to markets. And that's one of the key things in my area that that we enable is international trade, helping our businesses access new markets, operating across different markets, and then solutioning for them in optimal structures for their their multi-territory operations. And then importantly, if you're working across different markets, you need to be able to manage foreign currency requirements, etc. So we also provide solutions around that. So that's really how, not just solution, but we partner with our clients to help them operate across different territories.
In your view, what role does digital transformation play in advancing Africa's international trade capabilities?
I think it has a big role to play. I think if you look at just what M-Pesa has done in East Africa, particularly in Kenya, when it comes to Africa and solutioning for Africa's problems, I think M-Pesa is a very good example of how you have an African solution for an African problem. And I think there's learnings to be taken from that. But for us not to miss, that when it comes to the movement of money, Africans, the simpler the better. So digitization is a good example of the role of digitization. I think, and how African countries, African businesses start to trade with each other, it will definitely play a role. It will definitely help with even the concerns around the risk perception, or who the counterparties are that you're dealing with. And certainly when it comes to digital, it can help Africa actually leapfrog some of these development steps when it comes to trade, when it comes to doing business across borders. So I think it has a very key role to play, and certainly something that we harness at the bank, where we're ensuring that when it comes to transacting, whether a client is paying, whether they're sourcing forex solutions, or they're looking at a trade finance instruments, we are have digitized those capabilities, so that we also ensuring the service part, but also the scale and efficiency is built in. I think those are the nuggets that digital transformation offers for the continent.
How do you see the future of trade between Africa and BRICS countries evolving over the next 5 years?
I think Sub-Saharan Africa trades quite a lot with China, and Brazil and Russia, probably pockets of some of the Sub-Saharan countries. But I definitely see that evolving. There's quite a bit that North Africa is also beginning to do with China. And I think with the broader BRICS community, it's one that could be actually a formidable partnership over time, owing to what I mentioned earlier on just Africa's capability to really become dominant when it comes to the agricultural sector globally. Its potential to be able to produce more to both the region, but also outside. And I think that's a big opportunity for the BRICS countries. It could be a strategic one. The other one is you have to look at the automotive sector. There's been some advancements that we've seen in Morocco and in Egypt, in addition to obviously South Africa's long-standing expertise in this sector. And there's pockets of opportunities springing up in Ghana and Kenya, that's particularly looking also at the electrical vehicle space. So I think when it comes to the BRICS countries, there are these very sort of strategic sectors that present an opportunity. But those two are ones that are very topical and spring to mind when I think about it. Even when it comes to energy production, if you think about China, just its geographic positioning, I mean, at some point I see that you'll start to see some more component manufacturing happening on the continent, because just geographically, Africa is a much more strategic position to reach other parts of the world. So I think that's where some of the opportunities are for these countries.
In our conversation, we've mentioned opportunities and challenges, but may you just highlight any successful trade initiatives or partnerships your organization has been involved in recently?
Yeah, so I'll probably mention how we've been helping African businesses in the agri value chain, access the China market before even the tariff-free announcement by President Xi Jinping. We've been doing this now for 5 to 6 years, and there's a couple of our clients where we've unlocked, good, export opportunities for. In particular, in 2023, we had, a few of our clients unlock, export deals to the value of $150 million. And that is ranging from, raw commodities, sesame, nuts to, your shea butter. And increasingly in that market, there's a shift towards more of the natural skincare products which come from here. So it's exciting that, Africa gets to play in that market, not just in that, agri-food space, but even now the cosmetic space, even for aloe vera products that are coming from South Africa. So we ensure that we are constantly having our finger on the dial and seeing those shifts in demand and the change in the Chinese consumer and connect that with our clients. So those are some of the successes we've had in recent times.
A bonus question. I can't resist. Let's come back home.
Yes.
This is B20.
Yes.
And also, we're taking advantage that South Africa is hosting the G20 in November.
Yeah.
What are the bottlenecks as we are going through B20 that you would like to see regulation changes from the part of the Treasury, from the part of the DTIC? What are those bottlenecks that somehow may impede your fast-tracking the developments you've been speaking of? One of those developments is AFTA, one is the development of the region. Are there any specific bottlenecks that if we were to unlock those ones, then you would predict a better trajectory for the future?
Yeah, home. I think if we can fast-track the ratification and deposit of the instruments for AfCFTA, so that we have more goods that can be traded free with the countries that have signed the agreement. If we can revisit the capital requirements for banks when it comes to what's required according to Basel III with the SARB. If our government, who's holding the presidency of G20, can look at the recommendations coming from the B20 task forces and adopt them and actually put KPIs and we measure the progress of them, that will really accelerate us, because those are really good recommendations. They are practical recommendations that will speak to food security, energy transition, finance and capital flows into key infrastructure, and how make infrastructure projects more investable, our industrialization, what should that policy speak to and think of in lieu of both South Africa and the rest of the continent. I think that for me would be success, and that's what the bottlenecks that you're asking about. I think if we can have the SA government actually take on these recommendations with seriousness and intention is really what will move a dial, and we'll see some progress on some of the key areas in the economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luthando Vuba. Thank you for the conversation with the head of international trade and Standard Bank.
Thank you very much.
Sure.